Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Orzsag, welcome. And I know you're a student of economic history, and I think you have a sense of where we've been, where we are now, and looking to the future. And you have a sense of the proper level of debt management in the short-term relations to the need for government to step up and create jobs for the long term. And it would seem to me that history, in some respects, is probably our best teacher. And like any good teacher, we should pay attention to the clear lessons that it has. We learned in the 90s how deficit reduction tools, such as PAYGO, led to record budget surpluses, and last month, Democrats alone voted to bring back statutory PAYGO in order to begin a process of restoring fiscal discipline. But critics of the government's role have forgotten what the Great Depression taught us less than a century ago. They say that government actions are threatening growth, that government should not invest in job creation or economic recovery, that we should step aside and let the free market work in this present environment. But the obvious question is, isn't that to some degree what got us to where we are today, and how do we get out of where we are today, but for the engagement at this critical time of government? You know, Herbert Hoover in 1929 said you had to leave government out of the recovery equation. He said then economic depression cannot be cured by legislative action or executive pronouncement. Economic wounds must be healed by the action of the cells of the economic body, the producers and consumers themselves. Well, we know what that brought us. So my question is, would you agree that such thinking is short-sighted, ignores the fact of the excesses of the free-for-all economic policies that we've had, particularly over the last 8 years, and, you know, the very underpinnings of what at a different time brought us the Great Depression and now has brought us the Great Recession on the verge of a depression. I think it's important to put, as we move this budget forward, to have a sense of a little bit of the recent history that people forgot. Is that context right, wrong?
Yes, I think it is right. And in fact, I believe that history will judge the actions that were taken over the past year to avert falling into a second Great Depression with great favor. Measures to stabilize financial markets, and you see, and we provide in the budget a chart that shows a dramatic decline in credit market spreads from the hugely elevated levels that they had reached. A dramatic shift from, again, the economy declining by more than 5% at the end of 2008 to growing by more than 5% at the end of 2009. Job losses, even though they are still too high, dramatically lower. Don't forget, at the beginning of 2009, in January 2009 and thereabouts, employment losses, job losses were 700,000 a month. So even though they remain higher than we'd like now, it's a lot better than 700,000 a month. In no small part because of the significant action that the Congress working with the administration took. Every outside analysis that I have seen, for example, of the Recovery Act, suggests that it played a key role in spurring economic activity in the second quarter, in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, and that there would be, by our estimates and by outside estimates, roughly 1.5 to 2 million more people unemployed today without the Recovery Act. So that's the first point. The second point is the other lesson of history, as you well know, is to avoid the mistake that was made in 1937, which was right when the economy was starting to pick up a bit again, slamming on the fiscal brakes too tightly. So we face a very big challenge, which is we have significant out-year deficits, and if we don't get them down over time, ultimately, they will create a problem. But we also have an emerging recovery here that cannot be stifled just as it's taking steam. And finding that balance is what we tried to accomplish in this budget, a smooth landing, bringing the deficits down from about 10% of the economy gradually over time to a level that's significantly lower. And if we act too quickly, we face a significant risk of unnecessary job loss.
So clearly we need, in the short term, some, particularly as we look at the jobs package that hopefully we will unveil in the next day or so, the opportunity for the government to move in the short term as we restrain in the longer term. Otherwise, it's just, we're not going to see the job growth that we'd like to see.
That's correct. And if I could just comment very briefly.
And before my time runs out, and then you can answer all you want. Let me ask you, we had 2 tax cuts before unpaid for. Is that correct?
Yes.
We have 2 wars that are unpaid for up to now.
Yes.
Is that correct? We had an entitlement program on the Medicare Part D unpaid for. Is that correct?
Yes.
So as this budget calls for, obviously some of that, you can't have all of that spending totally unpaid for and look at your long-term debt consequences. Is that fair?
Yes. Could I just very briefly comment on one of the challenges that we face is the Recovery Act has been very helpful in restoring economic activity. But as normally happens during a recovery, job growth lags behind. So one way of sharpening the focus on a jobs bill is to try to accelerate, get rid of the lags or shorten the lags between, what normally happens is GDP starts growing. The first stage is very rapid productivity growth, and that is indeed, with a new report out this morning too, exactly what we've been seeing in the past few quarters, very rapid productivity growth. The next stage is an increase in temporary hiring and hours worked among existing employees, and only finally then do you get an expansion in actual employment. One of the goals of, for example, the new jobs and wages tax credit is to try to collapse that cycle or those lags so that you can more tightly link GDP growth to job growth and shorten the lags involved.